Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm George Jackson, Vice President of Events at GovExec, and your host for today's program, How Embracing DEIA and Early Talent Strengthens and Empowers the Federal Workforce, sponsored by Yello and produced by GovExec. Today's human capital leaders face no shortage of challenges in their work to build the next generation of public sector talent. A complex hiring landscape, competition with private enterprise, and use of outdated technologies all challenge their ability to hire the people they need and deliver for the citizens they serve. In tackling these issues, it is essential that government leaders take a collaborative approach to deliver robust solutions in partnership with the public and private sectors and explore new ways to build the federal workforce of the future. What actions can they take to strengthen workforce planning efforts in the short and long term? We'll seek to answer this question and others with a great group of panelists today. Wanzi Gardner is Chief Human Capital Officer at the National Science Foundation. Wanzi, welcome. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
His colleague, Charles Barber, is NSF's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Dr. Barber, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
And John Newman, Director of Federal Programs at Yello. John, great to see you again.
Thank you.
So John, kick us off. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you come into these topic areas.
Yeah, so first and foremost, thanks again for putting this together. We're very excited to be here. But a little bit about myself and our organization. I oversee our federal program here at Yello. I oversee a team who's responsible for the overall success and growth of more than 40 federal customers who are currently using Yello's solutions today, with nearly 15 years of work experience in the software industry and more than 10 years specifically in the GovTech industry. So very excited to be here and speak more collaboratively about Yello's overall solutions as well.
Wanzi, how about you? How did you land at NSF? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Hey, George, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with Chuck and John and to talk about this because I think this is so key to us. I kind of backed in here. I've got 27 years of experience. I was in the Air Force, retired colonel. I was a mission support group commander where I had IT, HRM, and those kind of mission support things up under me. When I retired, I started at USDA, worked at the Food Nutrition Service Agency, and then I came to NSF in 2014, worked administrative services, and I kind of back in this job. I got this job, and I went to become a DD, or head of administrative services. Then I was asked to be the deputy office head and information resources manager, which is part of the Chico office as well. So I took over in 2018, I believe it was 19. And it's been a meteoric rise ever since then, working on human capital professionals here at NSF and at OPM. And so learn how to look at things from an HR perspective on this side, but taking all the other stuff I learned throughout my career to make sure it all manages and matches together. So I think it makes for a very good blend of opportunities and responsibilities I've had in the past.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Barber, great to see you again. I understand that your role is relatively new within NSF. Is that right?
Absolutely. Just newly established as a part of the CHIPS and Science Act. In January was when I was onboarded here at NSF. And George, I'll just go right into my background if that's appropriate. But Army veteran, which gave me the experience to kind of really appreciate how to work with folks from different backgrounds and different cultures. Given that, lots of experience in both HR and culture. And in my opinion, that's where DEI intersects. And given that experience, to be able to work in those disciplines at all levels, in government, military, and in private sector, to me, that's what makes the CDIO, effective, and it also gives me that great appreciation about, why my role and my relationship with Wanzi as a Chico is so important to the success of the foundation. So excited for the conversation today.
Well, Wanzi, he set me up for my next topic here, sign of a really good panelist, of course.
Okay.
Talk to me about some actionable steps that NSF is taking right now to streamline, to automate the hiring process. I mean, I gave that context at the top of the program. There's a lot of competition right now.
Hey, George, it is. But before I get there, I want to just say that having Dr. Barber here, Chuck, here is the culmination of some ideas and concepts we had about bringing diversity in our organization. He talked about Chips and Science Act, but I think even if we didn't have the act, we knew at NSF we had to move in a different direction. And I don't want to steal Chuck's thunder, but I do think that what he's going to talk about is an output we're looking at. And so bringing him here, bringing him on board and put him on equal status where he reports out across the enterprise, both internal and external, has been really great for us. And so we're looking for great things. Now, to your question, how do we compete? How do we automate? One of the big issues that we're looking at as we try to look at our workforce is how do we bring in young people in a way where they are excited. We can bring them in a process where they're going to help us out. And our internships have been greatly increased. Internships have been an integral part of what we do. And so we've increased those to 20% this year, paid internships. So we can have people coming in early on and bring them on. Because I tell people all the time, government is like an apprenticeship. You've got to be on board to understand how we work and understand what needs to be done in the various organizations. You may have the technical skills or a degree for a particular job, but the government is very, very unique when I look at how we work versus private sector. And so the other part is we're trying to streamline as much as possible can the hiring process. One of the things that I've noticed with our young people, and that's what we're talking about, the process for entering government is very laborious. We're trying to change that. I think from my standpoint, it takes 81 days for me to hire someone on board from the moment they do an application to I get them to what we call our security clearance apparatus. John probably can hire somebody in about a week's time and they're on board. I've got to be able to shorten that piece so I can bring those same people on and track them. And so they are interested. So we're also trying to make sure that we have internships or some internships where they can go to school, come back, and see what we're doing, see how they fit in there. And so we're taking those innovative steps, and we're trying to also take in more of an AI approach and using robotic process automation to take care of those different things as we move forward. And finally, the second part we're looking at talent teams to how we bring people on board. We're actually looking at what we actually need, doing talent assessments of our people, and making sure that we get a certificate. Those people on their certificate are the right people that we can choose out of those top 10 for any particular job we have as we move forward in our enterprise way.
Wansi, I'd like to stay with you for just a moment. That talent assessments aspect isn't something I've heard before, and I think our audience would value that information greatly. What goes into those?
Well, we're partnering with OPM and our own talent assessment teams to make sure if we have a particular job, we're looking for the right skill set, not a resume, but a right skill set. We can actually ask the right talent questions to make sure through a series of interviews with a person, for example, we can tell whether or not they have the skills, knowledge, capabilities to do that particular job. We have found going forward that we use talent assessments, the selection criteria, the selection pool is much better for the agencies. And so we're trying to make sure that we're doing the talent assessment. What talent does a person really have bringing to our agency versus, quote, skills they say listed on a resume? And so we have these various questions we can ask through our various processes to make sure that the candidates that they're looking at our jobs, the candidates we're looking at have the actual talent and skills to do the job we're required for them to do.
John, I want to get back to that automation point. Wansi's, I'm going to tease out a couple of things here, but Wansi's statement about how do we bring young people in and the focus more on AI, on these talent assessments, on robotic process automation, seems to me like moving technology more seamlessly into those processes is an important step that a lot of agencies are taking right now. If you draw back from NSF, what are you seeing across the public sector, John?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think first and foremost, and the theme to much of what I will be speaking to today is the need for organizations to be proactive in everything that they do. If your organization is simply posting jobs and vacancies and hoping people apply, you're about 10 to 15 years behind the curve. And it's absolutely paramount and critical that organizations take the proactive steps necessary to get their name out there and focus on their employer brand and explain their mission and tell their story so that candidates can resonate with that and ultimately apply for a position. And there are a couple of key pieces, I think, that organizations must do in order to do that effectively. One, leveraging technology. It's a no-brainer in today's world. There are too many candidates out there, and technology is absolutely paramount for organizations to pipeline the right set of candidates. And it creates an environment where organizations can focus on the quality of candidates and not necessarily the quantity of candidates. We'll speak to more of that here in a minute, but I think another key piece of being proactive is organizations having the dedicated recruitment and outreach teams. A lot of organizations have that now, but many still don't. And you have to have the personnel in place along with partnership with technology and partnership with industry in order to be effective in that. So those are a couple of key pieces, I think, and technology really drives the efficiency overall in casting that wide net and allowing for organizations to truly be proactive in identifying top quality talent for their organization.
Dr. Barber, I was watching you out of my second monitor here in the office, and something jumped out there for you. Go ahead.
Well, I think, this particular part of the conversation is actually, it kind of demonstrates the power of the relationship that I have with Wanzi, as a Chico, because he and I, we talk on a regular basis. We very well aware about, being able to really take advantage of that full spectrum of diverse talent that society has to offer for the sake of national security, for the sake of advancing science. But we also know that we want to recruit folks who want to be here, and as a part of our DEI efforts, we want to make sure that we're creating that environment where we really can increase belonging and increase that inclusive leadership, and so one of the things we looked at doing is building a DEI maturity model, which is basically, it's a 5-phase continuum that uses both quantitative and qualitative data to really assess where our leaders and organizations fall on a continuum, but it also provides a roadmap so that leaders and organizations can create those successive chapters to really increase belonging. And so we look at this from the full employee life cycle perspective. Bringing them in is just one part of it, but we also want to look at how do we retain that talent as well. And there's some other things that we can get into in terms of our underrepresentation model and things of that later, but I'm pretty sure that'll come up later in the conversation.
Absolutely, sir. So Wanzi, you mentioned, these talent assessments, but I know from prior to this going on the air that you're also looking at internships, you're looking at fellowships, you're looking at apprenticeships. You have a lot of tools in your toolbox there. What are those as sort of your larger succession planning, your larger talent management strategy, sir?
Yeah, hey, George, if I can, before we move on to that, can I go back to what John mentioned about when we're looking at people? I think also one of the things I failed to mention earlier, before when you came in the federal government, we were looking for that person who's looking to say 20, 30 years, this was going to be their career. They came in, they did not leave the federal government. That model has changed. What I'm looking for is that partner, a young person wants to come in for a little while, work with the federal government, maybe go out to private industry and private enterprise to figure out what they're doing over there, come back and forth, especially on the HR side. Why is that so important? Well, this younger generation, they're not looking for the same thing that we had before. And one of the things I tell my colleagues on the Chico councils, we've got to change our methodology, how we look for people and how we staff ourselves moving forward. We've got to make sure we get that quick win. We bring them in, they do something for us, we give them an opportunity to come back out to the private side, and they can come back in at a commensurate rate when they mature, do different things. And I think that's going to be the model that's going to make us successful as we move forward in trying to level set and reset the federal government. It's so important we do that. And one of the ways that we want to look at that, again, as you mentioned earlier, those paid internships and those different strategies, we do not hire only young people, but people in different genres that can help us. We do things. As Chuck will tell you, in our line of business, National Science Foundation, we have a lot of we call it IPAs, interpersonnel people that we bring in to do our science, right? That's a very niche group that we have to use to make sure we can advance science forward. We're also looking at those various niche groups in our other submission support areas. They can come in and help us do a particular job right away, perhaps move back out and move forward. From our IT support to our guys in HRM and our other mission support side of the house. So our internships and our pathway programs we're using, George, they're very integral to us to look at how we're doing that. And in addition, we're advertising a lot differently than we did before. in the years past, strictly USA Jobs and monsters.com. We're finding out that a lot of our younger clientele we look for are not looking at USA Jobs. They're looking at Handshake. They're looking at LinkedIn, things like that. We're also going out to minority serving institutions, to Chuck's point, and other MSIs to make sure, and HBCUs to make sure we're attracting that kind of talent, to make sure they know that. Because one of the things I tell people all the time, if I fish from the same pond every day, I'm going to get the same type of person. I've got to expand that pool to make sure that we're attracting a diverse talent to bring to our agency, into the federal enterprise. And why is it so important to me and others like Chuck? We want to make sure that that federal workforce looks like America's quilt. It has all different colors, genres, and things as we move forward. So it's very important we do that as we try to level set and make our employees look like the rest of the country.
Enjoy that level of ones you just said, America's quilt. That's powerful.
I'm going to use that in the future, Wanzi. I will
Okay.
credit you, sir. I promise.
Listen, I'm going to trademark that, okay? A patent.
John, add to that talent management strategy portion of the conversation, if you would. Give us some additional context there.
Yeah, I think one thing Wanzi mentioned that's I think really powerful as well is embracing change, right? And the audience that federal agencies are going after, let's call it the Gen Z audience, right? And that audience is very different from audiences of past generations. And it's really important to know your audience and know how they want to be interacted with. And going back to the theme of being proactive, candidates expect and want to be engaged with all the time. And you have this idea of creating a high touch point environment to candidates who haven't even yet seen a job or even know who your organization is, and gets into this whole entire part of your employer brand and really selling your mission and explaining your story and explaining how you're committed to diversity in the workforce. And that's what Gen Z wants to hear in order for them to be ultimately attracted to that particular job vacancy. They're very particular in how they want to be engaged with. And they what we've seen in our data, our customers tell us, is they really value authenticity. And authenticity requires many touch points. It requires, higher levels of engagement, rather than, again, the old school method of posting jobs out there to USA Jobs and hoping that people apply. And you really have to embrace the technology in order to do that. No one has the bandwidth with the resources that they have to just send a one-off email to a candidate and hoping they apply, right? You have to put this into the ecosystem of constantly nurturing this talent and telling your story, building out those proactive pipelines in order to ultimately convert what we're considering like these prospects and leads and people, passive talent who might be a fit for the organization one day, to convert them into actually applying for a position. And you have to leverage technology to do that effectively.
John, if I could stay with you for a moment, what does the future look like there with constant engagement? Like if emails are out or telephone calls are out, or at least a smaller part of the broader strategy, like what else is in the mix there that is really effective out in the sort of state-of-the-art, workplace engagement, hiring, recruitment side of things?
Well, I don't know that emails and telephone calls are out necessarily. I think they're very much in fact, but it's mixing that as part of the strategy with your broader recruitment and outreach process, right? So it's mixing in emails with phone calls, and it's leveraging social media. Those are the channels that these younger Generation Z candidates that they're on. So you have to find them in the appropriate places. You have to find them on the LinkedIn channels and wherever else they're engaging through those different methods. And it's important to continue to engage with them. But it's more so around, I think, telling your story than it is. What you tend to see oftentimes is when an organization has a priority and a requirement to fill a bunch of vacancies, it's here's a job opening, click here to apply. Here's a job opening, click here to apply. You're not telling your story. All you're doing is trying to put a button in a seat. And if you can tell your story, and again, send quarterly newsletters to candidates explaining how you're committed to diversity in the workforce. And for Generation Z, a simple touch point such as wishing them good luck on finals if they're a student in school, right? That tells a story, and that's branded to your organization. So it's that warm, nurturing touch point that goes the extra mile and that differentiates you as an organization from everyone else who's just simply posting out jobs and saying, hey, here's a job, go apply. Here's a job, go apply. And it's really setting yourself apart from the others.
Dr. Barber, I want to go to a different topic, but before I do, anything stand out there in John's remarks, the personalization aspect, and maybe how it can have a really strong impact on those recruiting of the right folks you mentioned earlier in the program?
I think John's remarks and Wanzi's remarks both. These are the types of human capital officers that folks should be excited about. Because if you listen to both of them talk, you know, the underlying theme from both of the remarks is that, you know, diversity and merit do not have to be at odds with each other. You know, and I think if you look at the things that Wanzi and I are doing here, the communication we have with each other, we are demonstrating just that. And John's progressive thought leadership is right along those same lines as well. So just proud of both of them.
Wanzi, you mentioned the Chico Council earlier. If you could put on that hat for us and the audience for just a moment and maybe talk through some actions that are being taken to strengthen workforce planning efforts in the long term. You can do that with your NSF hat or with your Chico hat, but like look out to the future for us 5 or 10 years. And like when you look back, what efforts are you taking now that sort of will result in the successes that you're looking for?
I think that both of those hats are interchangeable because as the NSF representative on the Chico Council and then being blessed with my colleagues to be on the steering committee, one of the things we look at is a long range health of the federal enterprise, not just an agency. And one of the things we're trying to do is to level set to make sure that as when we talk about the future work, for example, how we all work. I've got to make sure, and we talk about this all the time, is that I'm not robbing Peter to pay Paul. Because unlike John in the private sector, in the federal enterprise, we have to have a level playing field because one job can be transferred to another, right? So I've got to make sure, one example is that if I allow administrative professionals or HR personnel in one organization to be fully remote, and another organization, they are not allowed to do that way, then we're going to have a bleeding off from one organization to another. So we're trying to level set by job positions, job categories across the enterprise, how we're going to do that. The other one that I look at is talent management, talent acquisition, talent strategy, how we maintenance, how we do those. When we talk about talent management, how do we manage a job series like HR professionals, for example? How are we going to manage it across the entire enterprise to make sure that the development goes on, let's say in the Commerce Department, is the same development we're doing in the National Science Foundation, DOD, any of my other agencies across the federal government, to make sure that we're growing our people in a way that they can go back and forth between various agencies to make sure they're doing the work for human capital management, for example. When I talk about the talent acquisition, we also look at shared certificates. In years past, every agency did their own certificate for the same type of job, which kind of caused things to slow down. One of the things we're really proud of right now, we're using what we call shared certificates, where someone at DOD versus someone at NSF versus someone at Commerce or NOAA can get the same type of person on one certificate. And why that's so important, and we've gone through the talent assessment, those people in that cert, we were already saying that they are a good fit for the federal government. Now it's my job as a Chico and National Science Foundation to see where they're a good fit for the agency. And when I use the word fit, I want to make sure we're all clear about this. This has nothing to do with sex, gender, or who you are and all kind of stuff. But do you have the mindset? Do you have the focus? Do you have the lens to do the work we're asked to do at the National Science Foundation? And how will you integrate in that whole entire process? I think that's so very important, so key. Before in the federal government, we didn't look at that, but to be competitive with John and other people, we've got to make sure that the people we're bringing in understand what our mission is, what our goals are, our strategic goals, and where we want to be in 3 to 5 years. So I've had the opportunity to do that for NSF on the Chico Council, and along with my other peers, as we try to level set for the federal government as we move forward.
Dr. Barber, John, I'd love both of your perspectives on kind of a subtopic here, but that competitiveness that Wanzi mentions, makes me think that agencies, that organizations have to stand out in that type of environment. You know, Dr. Barber, I know you've been working on an underrepresentation model inside of NSF. That might be one potential area where you stand out. There could be others, but weigh in there, Dr. Barber. And then John, I want to come to you on that competitiveness aspect as well, sir.
Yeah, so in the DEI space, we are routinely asked, what kind of metrics are you putting in place to really show that you're making progress? And let me just preface this by saying, diversity is a deliberate outcome that will not happen overnight. And so here's where we have an opportunity to really focus on the organizational change efforts needed to really get after those DEI outcomes over time. And so one of the ways we are doing that here is, I'm working really closely with Wanzi and his team, but we've taken our various federal occupational specialties and linked them to analogs with data provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau, and Department of Labor, pulled in the employment profiles and the diversity characteristics. And now we can tell you the level of diversity that can be achieved if that segment of society were available. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with quotas or affirmative action. This is making underrepresentation actionable through an equity lens, because what it does is once you can identify those areas where you're underrepresented, the model walks you through a series of steps. It's going to ask you to look at historical hiring trends. It's going to ask you to look at if you've updated your position descriptions or your job characteristics. Have you looked at sexual harassment complaints, because that impacts retention of talent, discrimination complaints, and et cetera. And then we've also baked in, a predictive analytic, because we've looked at projected census information, historical workforce information. Now we can tell you when we can reach population parity as well. But really, when you step back at the 30,000 foot level, George, what this does is it allows NSF to put a framework in place where we're going to continuously be competitive with the private sector. No offense, John, but advancing the diversity dimensions, that's just an added benefit. So when you talk about that competitive nature, that's what that unrepresentation model is able to do for us.
John, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine you do want agencies like NSF to be competitive with the private sector. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's critical. Well, you have to take a step back and understand what others are doing successfully in order to implement things within your own program, with your own organization. I think one part of that in understanding standing out from the crowd and understanding that competitive lens is most importantly, not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? We understand you have to have the dedicated workforce and the teams in order to be proactive with that approach. You have to leverage technology, right? You have to understand and know your audience. We've touched on those topics already, but think about it we're going back to, again, internships and things like that of younger generations. Where are those younger generations? They're typically in schools, and you have to partner with schools. You have to partner with diversity organizations to get access to those candidates, right? In order to be able to tell that story. And I think it goes very much to, Dr. Barber, we're preaching here about how NSF, it's really ingrained in everything they do. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a part of all of that. But you have to have the means to tell that story and explain that to everyone, because not every candidate knows that, let alone do they even know what the National Science Foundation is all about. So again, not putting your eggs all in one basket, having the means in which to tell that story. And then I think also another critical piece, which we haven't really mentioned yet, is allowing data and metrics to really help advance that strategy. And again, it goes back to technology. If you don't have technology, if you have a very manual process in place and a very reactive approach, you have no data, you have no metrics. And what senior leaders across organizations are saying is, oh, where is this talent coming from? We hired these people. They seem to be great. Where'd you find them? No one really knows the answer to that, right? So you have to have a data-driven approach and strategy and process built out. Everything going back to the very beginning, to sourcing and finding talent, to engaging and pipelining with talent, to speeding up the actual process after a candidate has applied. And you have to have the means and visibility across the entire spectrum to allow the data to tell that story and ultimately make those changes within your process.
Yeah, quantitative and qualitative data. Both types of data.
Absolutely.
Wanzi, I cut you off a moment ago there, sir. You want to jump in on that?
I sure
recruitment?
did. Yeah, and I just wanted to echo something I want to make sure that my colleague Chuck gets the credit for this. But he always talks about diversity being an outcome, DEI being an outcome, and that is so critical in a merit-based system where the best candidate rises up. We want to make sure to, because I think Chuck hit on this, we want to make sure that we're not looking for a quota. We're not looking for anything like that. We're looking for the best candidate. And I think when you expand your pools and you look at DEI as being an outcome versus an input, and we ingrain into what we're doing, it's so very important. And one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit here is that in our enterprise, there is sometimes a rub between the CDIO and the Chico. That's not here. We are like symbiotic twins here. We are aligned at hip because I know what Chuck is trying to do. It assists me in doing my job and vice versa, because it's more important than just a hire. We got to make sure that we have a diversity of thought, diversity and of all kind of things. When we look at a person, we look at our actions, because I've been taught a long time ago, when I get varying views and perspectives about an issue or situation, I can come with a good decision because I'm getting various views. And it goes back to what John said about the data as well. Those varying views, I get the data, and I can make decisions based on data and based on what my people are seeing and experience. When I'm looking at that, I found that when people start thinking like me, I'm in trouble. I'm always asking my staff, push back on me, tell me something different. Because when they can't do that, they're not thinking the way they should be. Because as a Chico and as a senior leader, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're not just getting a bunch of yes men, but I'm looking for original thought. If it's not original thought, tell me why I'm doing what I'm doing makes sense. And if it doesn't, then we have an issue there. So Chuck, I really appreciate you making that comment about diversity being an output of our conversations.
Yeah, and to me, Wanzi, it differentiates efforts that focus on organizational change work from just being perceived as activism. That's
yes,
it's important.
John, one topic we also haven't covered yet, and I'm going to just give a little context here. I've been covering public sector now for about 12 years. And in year one, this was a topic, they called it the gray wave, which meant, coming retirement of federal employees. And maybe that's happened in a number of different waves since then. But what actions are currently being taken to, around this filling the gaps idea for retirees, for general turnover? Like, how have those changed over time?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, it's no surprise that I believe it's more than 30% of the federal workforce is eligible for retirement in the next 5 years, right? And that's a huge red flag. But it goes back to, again, how are you replacing that workforce? And the organizations who already have the dedicated resources from a recruitment and outreach standpoint to go out and find that next generation of talent, and you have the vacancies and you have the ability to fill those positions with younger generations of folks, you have to start there, right? But then again, it goes back to what I talked about earlier of understanding that audience. And we hear some federal organizations that we work with are not only just engaging with candidates at the college level and even the entry level, but you have organizations who are interacting with high school students and looking at different STEM programs, and really, again, without even some of these candidates aren't even eligible to apply for a position, obviously, right? But it's part of that employer brand and getting your name out there to build that trust along the way, so that when these candidates are eligible to apply for a position in 3, 5, 7 years time, they know, oh, hey, NSF helped us out with this, or, I remember this high school course that I took and NSF came in and spoke and gave a presentation about this. And those are the kind of connecting pieces. I think when I said earlier about Gen Z values authenticity, those are the pieces that they're going to remember, and helps you set yourself up for success and ultimately build up those pipelines to replace that aging workforce that's eligible to retire.
Dr. Barber, I want to pull on another thread that John raised earlier too, about data and metrics and the use of them to advance strategy. For you, what role does data play in tracking, in achieving successful DEIA and hiring goals inside NSF?
Yeah, I would tell you, again, whether it's quantitative data or qualitative data, using the data makes conversations in the space evidence-based and not just opinion-based. That is so important because that's going to also help to keep conversations, consistently constructive. Anytime that you can use data to not just be data-driven, but to be data-informed and then ultimately data-inspired, that is absolutely important and why data plays such a critical role in being able to drive success in the DEIA space.
Wanzi, you mentioned the C-suite and your work on communication with those folks earlier in the program. And I'm wondering if, those types of conversations are happening between you and the agency's chief information officer, the agency's chief data officer, or folks that hold similar titles. Are you having conversations about data, and what do they put in front of you to help better inform decisions more broadly about hiring, about recruiting the right people, and the speed with which you're doing that?
Oh, Chip will tell you we have those conversations all the time on our executive leadership team, and so much so that we consider ourselves a small agency right now. And as he mentioned earlier with the CHIPS and Science Act, there's a lot of money that potentially is going to come to NSF. So we want to position ourselves in a way that we can be most responsive to the American taxpayer, most responsive to the frontiers of science, and even more responsive to how we onboard, how we maintain our staff. One of the things that we're doing that we've talked about is we're going to hire another senior executive to take over all of IT. When I got here in 2014, I had what we call operational IT, the IT infrastructure, some applications, and then we had a CIO that looked strategically our outward facing things. But to be a larger, more mature organization, we need to put all that IT together and add that data piece to it. And the CDO, the CTO, all that'll be housed in one area so we can have that person have a higher focus on both our IT infrastructure and data analytics as we move forward. Your question about it, we look at how we look at data, that's going to, as Chuck mentioned, inform some decisions we make as far as how we hire people. One of the things we talked about is having more data analytics or data scientists on board to help us look at the data, because without those type of people that can interpret the data and use the data the right way, it's just really just more information. So we've got to make sure that we hire the right people to do that. And so one of the things we made a committed effort is to hire more data scientists at NSF at the right strategic location, where we can actually look at our data, tell what it's forecasting, but be more predictive than reactive. And also so we can make decisions on human capital management from the data we're seeing as we move forward. And to John's point earlier about our recruitment and things with people start retiring, we're letting the data drive that, because all of our federal occupational skills are not retired at the same time. We got to look at that, and we got to ask ourselves which ones are the most critical. All our jobs are valuable, but some jobs are more critical than others. So we're going to let data drive to us how we need to look at that and how we need to support that. Because, John, just like in the private sector, I too am concerned about the quote, the graying of the rest of the federal enterprise, because a lot of us are getting up there. We can retire. We want to make sure that we leave something for those behind us. Because in the federal government, we learn by apprenticeship. We learn by seeing what others are doing. We learn by experiences that others have gone through to make sure we get there, because there's really no manual how to do that. Because we have the technical skills, but the federal government is a tired, different beast, as you know it is. And so we got to make sure that we have those apprentice type programs where people can learn how to work in the federal space.
Dr. Barber, I want to come to you in just a moment, because I think there's a cultural component to this that really ties everything together. But before I do, John, step back a bit from NSF, step back a bit for a moment from DEIA initiatives, and talk about the end state as far as data monitoring. Like, how do organizations gauge success around these larger initiatives?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Again, data is everything, right? And you have to understand it in order to make those changes and improve your own processes. And I think, take, for example, I mentioned earlier, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. And let's just talk about a strategy, a proactive strategy of organizations going out to and investing in recruitment events, right? You have campuses, you have diversity organizations, you have tons and tons of different ways to interact and engage with candidates at the upfront, and really kind of tell your story for that very first initial interaction, which is so critical to the process and pipeline and candidates effectively. But as you build out that strategy and you go to dozens of recruitment events, and some of our customers, quite frankly, go to hundreds and hundreds of recruitment events, right? It depends on, how you're set up and if you have the bandwidth to do so, but you have to understand the output of that and the success of that. So whether you're going to 5 to 10 recruitment events per year, or you're going to dozens or even hundreds of recruitment events per year, you have to know the outcomes of that. And at the end of the day, when someone asks you from a senior level executive says, "Oh, hey, how was that event last week? Did we get any hires? Did we find anyone?" If you're not leveraging technology, once again, you have no way of really telling that story. Perhaps you're giving your response based on what your mood was and if you were in a good mood last week or not, right? Or you had a couple of great interactions, but a couple of sour interactions. Let the data tell that story. So you have more of a quantitative approach in saying, okay, hey, we went to this 2 or 3 day recruitment event. We engaged with 150 candidates. Of those 150 candidates, 25% of those were what we consider top tier or top quality candidates. We extended this many on the spot offers at this recruitment event and so on and so forth. That tells your story. That tells your return on the investment. It's not inexpensive to go to recruitment events and to create this process and this strategy. And you have to be able to tell the return on the investment in order to make it effective. If you go out there and spend tens of thousands of dollars and just partner with schools because they're part of an alumni network, or you say, okay, hey, we need to partner with HBCUs, but you don't know the outputs of what those HBCUs are and like which HBCUs, are the best for your strategy specifically in filling your vacancies. You have to have the data there in order to tell the story. And ultimately, as you invest in more and more technology, there's an investment in all of it. And you have to know what the return is on that investment overall.
Dr. Barber, culture can be somewhat tough to measure, although there are, things like the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey that certainly put data behind a lot of those, bigger areas. Talk about culture and its role in this larger conversation we're having.
Well, first of all, if whenever this panel is viewed, if you listen to what John and what Wanzi and what I said to some folks, they're going to have a very comprehensive people and culture strategy, because everything that we've talked about today would actually wrap up into a very nice people and culture strategy for an organization. I mean, if you think about success of agencies to include NSF, the culture that has gotten us to where we are today is not the same culture that's going to get us to where we're going. Wanzi and I talk about this on a daily basis. We get it. And this is also the reason why we're going to get ready to pivot our DEI efforts into more of a culture, culture strategy. Culture is the underpinning of everything that we do in terms of DEIA. That's going to help us with sustainment. And so being able to kind of, tie all of these things to culture in a more sustainable way, that's what's going to make this work enduring and long term, and not just episodic.
Wanzi, what do we miss?
I don't think we miss anything, to be quite honest, because this is the ongoing conversation, one that needs to be had by leaders across the entire spectrum, whether you're in the private industry or in the public sector. And one of the things I liked about what Chuck said, and one of the things he's ingrained in my head, if I follow the data and look at what the data is telling me, not data I've created internally, but from the Census Bureau and other places like that, I can talk about diversity in a way that's non-threatening to everyone. Let's be honest, guys, DEIA is one of those topics where people get very uncomfortable if the ground rules are not set. One of the things that I think NSF has been so blessed with, and I know Chuck is doing a lot of this in the federal enterprise too, his maturity model, what he talks about when he talks about diversity, equity, inclusion, access, accessibility, it puts in a framework that's not threatening to people. It has nothing to do with my perspective, but everything to do with what my business model, my business goals are, how I'm going to do that. And so we're trying to look at DI from a cultural standpoint of it's who we are, okay? It's what we say we do. It's about improving our mission. Because again, when we bring in people from across America's quilt, we bring those kind of people in, we are making sure that we're reaching all parts of America. We're making sure that we're all represented, not for representation's sake, but just because we bring more to bear to this mission, to our agents, to our organization, when we look across the spectrum. I once had a boss that told me this. He says, Wanzi, when I start hiring people that look like me, that think like me, my organization dies. If I want my organization to live, I've got to hire people that not only think like me, but people that think counter to what I'm thinking, so I can make sure that we're looking at things from all perspectives. When you look at things from one lens only, you lose out. So hiring a Chuck Barber, for example, the NSF, or hiring someone from Mid-America, hiring someone from the Deep South, hiring someone from the Northwest at NSF, that's what makes us great. So we've got a real unique culture. And I'm going to end on this last note. We weren't number 2 in the best place to work for not. We did it because we put these things into practice. We did it because we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reason to move our mission forward. So I'm just proud of this conversation. John, Chuck, I'm honored to be here with you guys. I've had a ball talking about the subject with you guys.
John, any final thoughts?
I'd be reiterating everything that's already been discussed. I think again, it's just so very critical for organizations to stay proactive in their approach, think outside the box, partner with industry in ways that maybe you haven't done so before. Be open to change, right? And allow data to tell the story, right? Technology is everything. If you're not embracing it, quite frankly, you're very far behind in the times. And it's an important way to set yourself up for success for the future when it comes to recruiting and hiring talent.
Well, America's quilt fused with data. You've been watching how embracing DEIA and early talent strengthens and empowers the federal workforce. I've had a great group of guests today: Dr. Barber, Wanzi Gardner, John Newman. Thank you all three for being here. Really appreciate your time and insights.
Great discussion.
Thank you.
Oh, appreciate it.
And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. Be sure to keep an eye on GovExec for continuing coverage of the top hiring issues. Final thank you to Yello for helping make conversations like this one possible. For GovExec, I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.